Good morning, guys. This video was supposed to be posted yesterday. I had a day yesterday, so I apologize. And also, I went to go record this video, and the overhead lighting was giving me a blinding glare. So now I have like my candle going, and it's a spa in my office. So we're gonna usher in this semester with some tranquility, if you don't mind. A couple of you guys joined the live session yesterday, but we had a pretty small number. So, I have a glitch where, if I don't get at least 5 kids in a session, I don't want to hold you there. It's just a little uncomfortable for me to talk at one person. And I'm sure it's uncomfortable for you to feel lectured by just me. So, if we don't have a certain number, I will just table it and we'll discuss it another time. So your quiz is going to be up tonight at midnight, or it'll be up by tonight at midnight, and then you'll be able to access it at 9 a.m. if that makes any sense. So there's a couple questions that are going to be from your syllabus, and some that will be from chapter 1, and the rest from chapter 2. So this video is going to be going over chapter 1 and remembering a little bit from your syllabus. So the big thing I want you guys to remember is what day of the week you have to turn in your assignments. A couple of people were asking that yesterday, so it's always Sunday. And you always have to submit them on Blackboard. And I need you to remember what day you need to drop the class by before I validate my roster, okay, or verify my roster. So if you do not, by April 15th, drop yourself from the course, I will kindly do you the service of removing you from my roster. So don't take it personal if you get removed. However, that's 3 months of coursework, and so if you haven't completed anything by then, I feel as though perhaps you're not going to be participating. So those are the ground rules, some stuff. We went over all of that last week, and that's in the lecture I sent to you guys. So the book is not something I require in this course. I do use the PowerPoints from the book. So that is an instructor from our department, from the speech department with Tarrant County, that did, sorry, I need to sneeze, I believe. Maybe it'll go away. I feel like it's gonna go away, sorry. So one of our instructors did the PowerPoints that you see, chapter 1, chapter 2, was just posted yesterday. It's her voiceover. Sneeze is coming back. Man, sorry y'all. Whew, okay, it's gone again. So that is from the book that I'm going to be using as a context. And so between your PowerPoints and then what I go over in class, you will have everything you need for quizzes and tests. And you should not have any surprises on content. This is the same formula I used last semester, and we're not breaking away from anything in terms of how I taught the course and how I set up your test questions. So just if you feel like you missed something on a quiz, go back and reference your course lectures from me or the PowerPoint. And I think it's important to take notes during either. Just, A, it helps you to remember things when you transcribe them, and B, then you don't have to look at me more than you have to when you're taking your quiz. So the first chapter we're going to go over is chapter 1. So this is the book that I'm actually referencing. Beebe and Mottet, M-O-T-T-E-T. Motet, maybe it's French. I've actually never heard anyone say his name. So they call this book Beebe. And that's how it usually is in academics, is the first author of the book gets their name and a claim to it. So chapter 1 is communicating and leading at work. And the book really kind of talks about communication and leadership interchangeably with one another. So this chapter and the next chapter, we're going to be going over a lot of leadership terms. And just know that because of the way business and professional communications is set up, leadership is considered in the same vein as communications from the context of what we're doing, B&P. So the authors think that they're directly correlated to one another. And that's because communication, it's still considered one of the most invaluable skills an employee can have, and not just the ability to communicate, but to communicate well. We all know people who can talk a lot and who can communicate quantity, but we want to equip you to communicate quality. It's the biggest stumbling block for people still entering the workforce right now, is their ability to verbally articulate and communicate, and to communicate written. It takes the longest to train, it takes the most transition. And so a lot of employers and people in leadership roles, they really value the ability of their employees to come in to whatever job they're entering in and have the ability already to communicate effectively. So Warren Buffett, who you might not be familiar with, he passed away a couple of years ago, and so that'll tell you the book, like maybe how old it is, and it needs some updating. But Warren Buffett used to incentivize some of his top level employees up to $50,000 to take a communication course or to get communication training, because he valued his personal courses that much. He does a lot at Oklahoma State University, or gave a lot of money to the School of Communications, because he said it was the most important quality or asset that any of his employees could have, is the ability to communicate well. So, and this is a man who made his money in the financial sector. So just so you know, it is still a highly valued skill, and you only get a couple times to work on it. So either your high school course or this, and then the rest of it is on the job training, when you get into the workforce. So communications is, the book says it's the process of acting on information. Okay. So it's it being given to you, or it's being recited from you. And we're going to get into the actual model of communication here in just a second. So in communication, we make sense. So we make sense of how we personally view things, and we interpret things. And we're going to discuss bias and perspective in chapters to come. It's one of my favorite things. One of my favorite things to discuss in the field of communications is perspective and bias. So I'll go on a long tangent about that. We also share sense. So we take the things we understand from our bias and from our understandings, and we use words and we use nonverbal cues to communicate back and share what we know, what we feel, what we think, and we believe. And that's sharing it. And then we create meaning from those things. So we discuss this in our communication model. And I'll give you a little overview of it here in just a second. So it's how we create and we describe meaning. Okay, so creating meaning means it's once it's gone through the entire process. And so we personally describe certain meanings to certain things, but there's all sorts of things that communicate. Dolphins communicate. They ascribe their own meaning to certain things. They create meaning based off of different clicks and different things. But we also have subcultures where these types of making and sharing and creating meaning. Okay, so those are the three main pillars of communication and what it's about: making, sharing, and creating. So within different industries, you're going to make, share, and create different meanings than you would from other industries. And then you also have your family cultures. You have your whatever your ethnicity culture might be, or the country that you're raised in. We all make and share and create these different meanings. And so there's always communication going on in and around us in different ways. And we're always extracting information and changing and learning and growing what things mean to us, which is why I put the post up yesterday. It's the photo of the guy that says, normalize changing your idea based on being presented with new information. I love that idea, because our meaning and our understanding of things can shift a lot. And living in the information age we do now, it changes a lot, right? I think think the model of understanding for us and what we think is reality gets shifted and altered a lot in this last year. We had completely new meaning, completely new terms, completely new concepts that we understood or we had to be introduced to, and then we made sense of it, and then we shared it, and then we had to create a meaning around it. So if you think about these little terms that popped up in the medical sector, or buzzwords that we heard I always joke about like what the word of the week is for the media. Mitigate was a word that I heard more than I ever wanted to the month of March. Problematic was a word that I heard out of nowhere. And these are words that we created a meaning for, and then they became a part of our understanding of things within our country within the last year. So I will try to share a word of the week with each week with all of you. I haven't worked on this one, but I might get it to you this afternoon. Insurrection was a word floating around for recently, inciting an insurrection, and I had to look at the legal definition of that because I had never heard those two words been interchangeably put together, and now they have a meaning to me. So we are understanding of things and our creation and our sharing with one another changes and it evolves, but it's how we communicate. So this is this is in your PowerPoint too, and I'll let you know the minute mark at the PowerPoint. So, and I will also affix this to your lesson. So this is the Shannon and Weaver model. The book has, it's maybe this, but it's actually a little depressing to me that I'm like, I can't believe you guys put, this is the most important thing. It's the most important, most basic part of communication. This is how small it is in the book. Absurd. So this is the background, the backbone, and the understanding of how we interact, make, share, create meaning with one another. Okay, so the sender, so sometimes it's the source too, but what you need to know is that this is like the general overview. There's a couple of different models and they look a little bit different, and I'll get this up a little bit closer so you can kind of see it. It's a little bit fuzzy. And again, I will put this up on your course lessons. So this is the one I want you to commit memory to. It's the Shannon and Weaver model. It's not important that you know that, that you remember that for the quiz, but it is the Shannon and Weaver model, and this is who kind of schooled and came up with the actual model of communication. So I'll reference this often when we talk about perception, or we talk about feedback, or we talk about response. This will be something I go back to. So we'll do several different references back to this particular model. So, and I know some of you guys have seen this since, high school speech, but we're going to go back to it. So the source, this is where your messaging starts right here, is the sender or the source. Our book calls it the source, or calls it the sender. I learned it source. It's the same thing. So this is who comes up and originates the ideas that are being expressed. That's the person that's responsible for the delivery of the message. So they enforce, or they encode a message, okay? So the message is actually what's being communicated by the source. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because it's not what they're implying or inferring, or it's what actually they send across. So there's a lot of fun gender studies where there can be emails where someone implies or insinuates, but this person sends a message, and it's not about their intention. It's about what's actually conveyed, okay? It goes through a channel, okay? So the channel is gonna be any means of communicate, any way that communicates. It's either verbal, it can be nonverbal, it can be an email, it can be TV, it can be any method you think of communication. It can be a Zoom meeting, it can be a phone call, you name it. This is the channel right here. Facebook, social media, TikTok, etc. So they send it to the receiver, okay? That's the person who actually receives it, and they get to interpret it, and they get to decide the meaning of the perception of the message, whether the message this person sent was in fact accurate, or what if it was conveyed properly, okay? So all of this that comes around this model is noise, and it can be psychological. It can be this person is distracted. They have noise going on in the background. Their children are running, they're on a Zoom call. They can't concentrate, they can't focus. and or it could be physical, just there's okay, sorry, let me backtrack on that. Physiological is something that's going on inside of you. So distraction, they're hungry, it's right after lunch and their blood pressure's down. Someone decided they want to have a Zoom meeting at 9 p.m. and everybody's tired. Physical is actual noise. Things going on, moving in the background. There's stuff outside the window. Someone's jackhammering. Yesterday I was on a call and someone came by and was cleaning their window. That scared the out of me. That was physical noise. Okay, so it can be the video connection gets disconnected. There's all different types of noise, and so it moves. If you move through, you need to know sometimes there's noise and it interrupts the message, and the noise usually exists within the channel, right? Okay, so then however this person responds back to the sender, that's feedback. So that's a response to the messenger, and it can be nonverbal, head nod, acknowledgement. It can be a thumbs up. It can be it can be a response to an email. It can be they emphasize their text. It's just making it known that the communication has existed, if that makes any sense. So I will put this up. That's pretty much the whole model. I'm not going to overcomplicate it for you because we're going to go into it more in later chapters. So I don't want you to feel like you need to break it down and create an extensive model, although I might in your next course, in your next class, kind of ask for an example for one. So the biggest thing about this model, and to me, the receiver and the feedback is the context of something. It's where, when, why, how, and who the messages are happening between. There's a lot of noise and context that can come into any communication or any conversation. So there can be, high emotions. There can be a tense work environment based on that was surrounding an email that was sent. There could be relational dialectical issues that are coming into a conversation and that are causing those different types of noises. There's all types of things that can interrupt and affect and lead that model in different ways. And so it's interesting to think about the context of the model. And the best leaders, segueing into how leadership can play into communication, especially in the business world, the best leaders understand that. They understand that there's a certain time and place for certain conversations. They understand that their employees their emotions are heightened, and so maybe they need to be sensitive to that. The best leaders are able to interpret any hiccups that might have existed in this communication model, address that, and do away with it, or create a pivot or a posture where they can have that conversation in a different way. So they're also able to look at understanding breakdowns and hitches that happen along the way. So the ability to communicate competently greatly enhances leadership. It's huge. There's a lot of people who can speak well and they can talk at people. This is something my mom says. She gets off the phone. Sometimes she'll just, my mother's real name is Karen, so y'all are going to enjoy these analogies, but Karen will call me, and every now and then she just twists off and she just talks at me for 4 or 5 minutes straight about nothing. And she knows that there was no communication happening in that conversation. She just talked at me, and she'll say, well, I'll just talk at you later, because that was the exchange in that conversation. And sometimes there are people who just talk at. There are a lot of leaders who talk at because they laud themselves an expert on something. So they'll just kind of come at you with that information without giving any reciprocity about, they won't check if you're listening, if you're engaged, if you have questions, if you have rebuttals, if there are things in your job that you think may provide some feedback to them. So the best leaders are able to understand, I'm getting feedback from the person I'm talking to, or this is a loud room. Everyone's tired in this room. Why would I do a 9 p.m. Zoom call? Is social media the best place to do should we do a go live for our work session? Probably not. Those are things that it can be an innate talent. Some people just have the understanding of communication. They just innately understand. And then other people have to be taught. So, but it's something you can learn. You can learn communication competence. So our book talks about the qualities of leaders, and they say, it's a little vague. So it says leaders make things happen. That's true. It's not always good, but leaders do make things happen. They tend to be the combustion engine behind things getting done. So traditionally, a leader is supposed to move things along and get things going, and that is part of their responsibility. They're ethical. They should be ethical. They should be setting the standard of communication ethics and also workplace ethics. That's part of their responsibility as a leader, is to create a standard for others to live up to. And I just want you to commit this to memory, because it's something the book hones on, and it's become more and more and more important, especially in this last year. But they understand how to use technology to complement their communication. So everyone's use of technology in their industry is completely different. I work in oil and gas full time. So the way that we use technology is very different from when I used to be in the music industry. Very, very different. But either way, the people at the top always had a very basic understanding of the things we needed to use to do our jobs. And they knew how to conduct a meeting virtually. They knew how to create something visible online where everybody could access it. And it wasn't just something they relied on their staff to create. They understood the ins and outs of what a Trello board was, or what Gmail is, or why we use Outlook. I don't know why we use Outlook. We use it for the district, and we also use it for oil and gas, but a lot of companies use Outlook because of the security measures, and anyone who's in leadership has to understand and know how to use it and how to send emails properly. It's a big part of their job. It's not going anywhere. And especially with more people working remotely, you have to know how to use technology to complement communication. And so that is something I encourage you all. You guys you're lucky to be in a generation where most of you, you've learned how to use it and modify it as you get older. And so you're in a pretty place. But I worked with people who were older and who were not quite as savvy, and they didn't have the education that some of y'all got. It was all on the job training. If you've ever had to send an email for a CEO because he didn't know how to log into his email on his phone, it's a treat, let me tell you. So, okay. One thing I want to ask you is the difference in a leader versus a manager. So a manager is appointed. That's just somebody who's in charge because they were given that appointment. But a leader is somebody who exhibits those qualities. Okay. So some of you were thinking, well, my supervisor, my boss didn't make things happen, or they weren't ethical. They didn't understand how to use basic work technology. That's because they were a manager and not a leader. And I have this expression that I often say about many people I know in the work world, is that everybody wants to be the boss, but very few people want to learn how to lead. There are a lot of people who like to be in charge and tell people what to do and like to be at the top, but there's a much smaller number of people who understand how to lead their staff and train their staff and understand and empathize and do things in a way that they can create harmony around them and also get things moving and get things out the door. So it takes education and knowledge and on-the-job training. That's it. It just takes time to learn those things. And you'll learn a little bit more about it in this class. Hopefully you'll be a competent leader by the time you leave. So the last thing that we'll just go through and say other qualities of leaders. So in terms of communication and how they work within the model, okay? So they're aware of their communication within themselves and others. So I had a great manager, my first job out of college, John Garrett. He owned a community impact newspaper. It was a brand new company. It is now in 5 major metropolitans and one of the largest distributed community newspapers in the country. John knew he had a propensity to get distracted and have a lot going on. So he knew he had to schedule meetings from a certain time, and that if he was going to be distracted by a big project, he would move your meeting, not to be disrespectful and not to show that your time wasn't worth it, but because he did respect your time and he knew A, you would be offended if he tried to rush and push the meeting through, and B, he would be distracted if he had something going on with city planning or he had to cut out early and didn't want to cut you off. And so he was really good about making committed time with his employees and spending that time dedicated to them and talking to them and being engaged when he met with them. So also leaders can interpret and use verbal and nonverbal messages and cues. That means when you're giving them feedback, they respond to it. They can take in that feedback, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. If you're sitting in a board meeting with your leader and they're saying something that's not correct, they're reading the slides incorrectly, you give them one of these, they know their employee well enough to know that's not right. What I'm saying isn't right, and take the nonverbal, and probably, reach out and ask for a line and get a line from you. So good leaders listen and respond thoughtfully to others. They take into consideration how maybe what they said might be considered a little bit frank or rude, or it might not be the right tone, or it was the wrong time of day, or they had a bad day, or they're going through something with their family, or they have a huge project weighing down on them. And so they don't have time to kind of piddle around and have a small conversation about files today because they're working on a deadline. And the last thing is that leaders can adapt their messages properly. So the best I've ever seen someone actually do this was actually a music producer by the name of Dwight Baker. And I worked with a band and he produced the album that they were on, and he was able to speak to our drummer differently than he would speak to our guitar player. Our guitar player, he said he could just put his foot down. That wasn't the term he used. He used something way more inappropriate, but he said he could be tough. He could rough up on him. He could, cuss at him, and our guitar player would just take it and roll with it and go from there. But our drummer was more sensitive. So he had to softball toss a little bit better, pull him aside, have an easygoing conversation, and just be mellow with him, because he would get so worked up and anxious that his hearing would he'd shut down and his anxiety would get a hold of him. So Dwight would just pull him aside. He'd clear everyone out of the room and say, okay, I need you to perform this percussion just like this. Easy, easy, easy. And he knew how to speak to Eddie V, our drummer, in a way that was effective to Eddie V, whereas Caleb, our guitar player, he could just say whatever he needed to say to him. And that's what made him a great producer. He understood everything he knew every instrument intrinsically. He knew everything, every stringed instrument, every horn instrument, percussion, you name it. That man knows everything about music. He also knew everything about vocals, and then he understands people and psychology and moving through the model. He knows if he has his eye roll from a lead singer, that he needs to have a conversation with him. If the bass player has been sitting down for an hour and a half, he probably isn't interested in what's going on. So he was a good leader and modified and showed the ability to communicate to different people in different ways in a way that was effective with all of that. So that takes time, and it takes understanding people too. So that's all for chapter 1. I'm going to post a little something this afternoon. We're going to talk more about leadership styles and also self-awareness and communicating at work. So being cognizant of how we all talk to each other, or maybe where our perspectives come from. Again, I really love talking about our own perspectives, our cultures, our life stories, and how they affect the way we see others. And so we're going to dive into that. I will post that a little bit later this afternoon, and then I will put your quiz up. So, and I'm going to put an extra credit up for you this week. So that's a bonus. I do 6 extra credits throughout the semester. So you will have the chance to make, I can't remember if they're 10 or 15 points a piece, but I will go back and double check. So you will have the chance to make up some points for your grade. So I'm going to put something fun up by the end of this week. Your extra credits are not due on Sundays. They're all due at the end of the semester. Don't wait till the end of the semester. It's easier to get them done now. And it's easier to track your grade if you're doing them consistently. So I don't want you to feel, you have to scramble at the end of the semester to get those extra points in. I encourage you to do them in the time that they're assigned. So if you guys have any questions, I think I went through everything that is in your, we talked about listening. Oh, listening. I think we did. I want you guys to understand the difference in listening and hearing, because listening is the physical process of receiving and constructing meaning from verbal and nonverbal messages. And we'll get up a little bit later into listening versus hearing in some of our other chapters, but I do want you to make sure you watch the YouTube with General Stanley McChrystal talking about how he implemented training for 9/11. It's really interesting. And everything else is going to be forthcoming this afternoon. So I hope you all have a blessed Tuesday morning. Stay warm in DFW, and I will talk to you soon.